remember to buy a copy of your favorite books from the cheeky merchants. If we don't have it, we'll source it for you, but we'll definitely find the book for you.
Hello, cheeky natives! Can I get a whoop whoop? I feel like the cheeky natives in 2024 is on 1 million. I'm excited for another episode. Chinelo, how are you?
This year, I don't even know what people are going to do. So much offerings. I think it's interesting to share feedback. I saw a review about the cheeky natives. One person listened to our episode with Kichuka and Zelu, and they said they cried, and that made me feel really good, Alma. Because remember how when we record the episode, we even took a moment afterwards, right, to be like, oh man, that was intense. I'm really excited about today's episode. So I don't want to spoil it, but I need you to rush it up in introducing our guest for today.
Today's guest is Aiwanose Odafen, born in Lagos, Nigeria, and an MFA fiction student at the Iowa Writers Workshop. She has contributed to published nonfiction, participated in Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Purple Hibiscus Trust Writing Workshop. She was longlisted for the 2020 Commonwealth Writers Short Story Prize. We stand a multifaceted queen because as a high school student, she was a gold and silver medalist in the National Mathematics Olympiad competition. She graduated top of her class with a first-class degree in accounting and is certified with the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants in the UK. She holds an MBA from the Sage Business School in the University of Oxford. Prior to becoming a writer, Aiwanose worked as a consultant across industries, most recently in the public health sector with an international NGO, helping to save lives. Her first novel was Tomorrow I Become a Woman. Today, we are discussing her second novel, We Were Girls Once. Welcome to Cheeky Native, Aiwanose. We're so excited to have you, and we can't wait for this discussion.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. When they reached out to me to say you guys wanted to interview me, I was like, yes, I've seen some of the people you talk to. I'm a big fan of quite a few of them. So I was like, definitely.
As with the curse of sophomore novels, was there anxiety about writing this second novel, particularly because Tomorrow I Become a Woman did exceptionally well? People loved it. So was there anxiety about releasing We Were Girl Once in the face of how well Tomorrow I Became a Woman did?
That's a good question. I started writing We Were Girls Once before Tomorrow I Become a Woman was released. I'm so glad I did, because now that Tomorrow I Become a Woman obviously is out there, and like you said, the kind of response it got, I feel like if I started writing We Were Girls Once after it came out, I would have felt so much pressure, because even when I was editing this, because this is very different from Tomorrow I Become a Woman, right? And even when I was editing it, I did feel that anxiety, that pressure. Like, oh my gosh, this is so different. What if people hate it? Some people don't like it, which is understandable because we expect you to write the same thing. Writers should be allowed to explore. And I spoke to a writer recently who basically 10 years between her first novel and her second novel because of how well her first novel did. And yeah, so it was definitely a thing. But luckily for me, it was at the editing stage. I showed my editor, so I couldn't even withdraw it because my editor was like, oh, I think I like this. So I couldn't even withdraw it. I was like, what would be my reason? I just had to move forward with it. Yeah.
It's interesting that we've spoken about your first novel. Your debut was Tomorrow I Become a Woman. The protagonists in that book are then the mothers of the protagonists in We Were Girls Once. And what particularly strikes me is that in Tomorrow I Become a Woman, we're looking to the future. And in We Were Girls Once, it's very much a retrospective look. So much of it takes place in the past, and they're looking back. I'm curious about the significance of using the past as a tether for you in this book. I thought that was an interesting literary device, particularly for people who'd read the first book.
Yes, I never really thought of it like that. But one thing I was looking to explore in this book was trauma. A lot of people are traumatized by their past. And so when I was writing this, I'd watched this mental health documentary about trauma and how people carry these burdens and don't do something about it and how we all need to address it. And that really struck me. I wanted to explore that. You can't do that without exploring the past. And that's why, because for those that have read the first book, these three women are the daughters of women that have gone through a lot. It's impossible to grow up in that household and not carry some sort of burden. No matter how much you try to work through it, and luckily we have therapy, it's impossible not to still carry that burden. I wanted to explore that. At least part of the book goes back in time, because without unraveling the past, we can't address the future. That's one thing I wanted to do with this book, at least. So when you're living in a different country, even distance doesn't put space between you and that past. That was something I was keen to explore. Yeah. And how people bear trauma differently, because we see the way Ego deals with her trauma is quite different from the way Zina deals with hers, and completely different from the way Eriife deals with hers. And I really wanted to show that for women.
It's interesting because this work of writing a sequel, which is also standalone, right? Yes, it would be interesting to think about. You can read this book by itself without having to read Tomorrow I Become a Woman, and it would still be a great novel, right? I was really interested in that, a story that is interrelated but standalone. Mm-hmm. Why was it important for you to have kind of this continuation, right? But also have We Were Girl Once stand by itself.
Yeah. I read that first. And so growing up, I used to read all these books and all these series. I remember there's this particular author, I won't mention her name, but she's American anyways. But she had so many books. And because obviously I was growing up in Nigeria, we wouldn't get all the books in the series. You begin, and the ones we could get, okay, so what happened in the last, there's so many missing pieces. I found that frustrating. I wanted to write a book that as the reader in me, was conscious of that fact that people who walked into a bookshop, saw the cover, synopsis, or heard about it randomly, can pick it up without having read Tomorrow I Become a Woman. That's one reason I was keen to make this a different book, because it's very different. The style is different. Even the narrative approach, I wanted to separate it from Tomorrow I Become a Woman, because I do think that these characters deserve their own story. Yes, we do get glimpses into things that happen in Tomorrow I Become a Woman, but these characters deserve their own stories, their own personalities, like away from their parents. Because I think in many ways, even for us as adults, we're trying not to be like our parents, not because we don't like them, but you want to be your own person. I wanted that for these characters in writing this book. That's why, yeah.
Before delving into the characters, I want to talk about physical location, because it's an interesting plot device. We see Ego in the UK during Brexit as an immigrant. She's at a particular point in her journey, right? So she's left home to process the things that have happened and almost as an escape. And you think about how many people leave home as an escape. I think of them in Lagos, right? So Nigeria, Unilag as a student, particular points in their lives. Then Onitsha in the East, young professionals. Then Kano as the wedding setting. So there's a thing about the ways in which you link their physical settings with their states at the time. So when they're younger, they're students, they're in Lagos, they move, they're in Brexit, and they're in the UK during Brexit, young professionals at a particular point in their lives. I wanted to talk about why you located them in the ways that you did, because it's really interesting to think about how you are as university students and how you think of that city as an adult. Or even as a young child, nostalgia fuels how you remember certain places.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I think for everyone, we're a product of where we are at that point in time. The things we do, the things we think about are influenced by where we are. We react to our environment. And I was very keen to show that, and also to show just how different parts of Nigeria are. And then with the UK, as someone who's an immigrant in the US, but previously lived in the UK, that feeling of otherness, no matter how long I lived abroad, I wanted to write about that. I actually lived in the UK when the Brexit conversations were starting, and I remember how I felt. I spoke to a friend recently who, funny enough, now lives in Ireland, and we'd been in the UK around the same time, and she also felt that way. So it was not just me. We all felt the spike in anti-immigrant sentiment, the conversations that were happening. Even now, when they run away, like when they move abroad, like you're moving for a reason, right? Maybe you're running away from the terrible systems, or moving to move everything from where you've known your whole life to this new place. There's a reason. And I really wanted to explore that with Ego in particular, just how much for her the UK was a refuge. She's run away from the systems in Nigeria that didn't help her, that didn't save her from those that had power or those that had money. And for her, the UK was meant to be a refuge until it wasn't anymore. So now, Lagos, like you said, when you're living in a city, but then when you're a student, completely different. And I really wanted to explore that. An undergrad, life is simpler. I wanted Lagos to be that for them. When three girls come together, they remember life when they were younger, like growing up. With Kaduna, Onitsha, and Kano, I was keen to explore how different Nigeria is and different parts of the country. Because some people think Nigeria is a monolith. That's why people. So Kano is up north, very religious, more conservative than Lagos. The east is Nigeria's movie hub, where movies were made. In the era where it's seeking success, that's actually where you go to start and build from there, and then come back. It's more recently like Lagos became a thing for shooting movies. Like before, it was always the east. It was always the east if you're shooting English language Nigerian movies. I wanted to talk about how Onitsha was where for Zina, Onitsha was where she went to hustle, to find success. And luckily, she actually found salvation in a way, because that's when she met Zina. Yeah.
I think you've spoken about this connected to the physical locality, right? Particularly thinking about the UK. But there is also an interesting thing that I think you do with Ego, particularly in the UK, exploring immigration, right, as a proxy of not belonging, right? She's got this refuge of starting the Niger Girl in the UK to deal with her own non-belonging. It's also interesting in the context of a global pandemic, right? So you couldn't go home in the way that, yes, Nigeria is far from the UK. It would take some time, but like, there was something interesting that you did there about non-belonging as an immigrant in the context of lockdown. I wanted to talk about that.
We're taking a short break.
Non-belong is in the book. Ego moves back before the pandemic. Like you said, not being able, she's lucky that she's able to move home. Someone reached out to me recently and said something funny. I was like, oh, this is very middle class. Because she can go home. To admit, a lot of people can't because they can't afford the tickets, or they'll lose their job, or don't have anything waiting at home. And that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of longing, it's not because you don't know the country isn't perfect. Sometimes people say things like, oh, you can't see how the country is, don't come back. But it's not that.
And I suppose that's what Zina was trying to stay in the UK.
Exactly. And then Zina says, your country is where you're living, my sister. And so I love Zina's character so much, because she's just so, like, honest, brutally honest. Like, your country is where you're living, don't come back to this hellhole, and things like that. In many ways, both things are true. Even like now, I look at Nigeria every day. Most of my family is in Nigeria. I talk to them all the time, and things that are happening make me so sad. I remember after the October 2020 events, I made the decision to leave. And I know a lot of people felt that. I'm not middle class, I could leave. A lot of people can't. Like you mentioned, that continuous longing for home. And then I think, I'm sure you guys also saw it. One thing I really did try to write in the story, actually, it's just longing for a home, but longing for a better home. These three characters just want better for their country. They want a place that doesn't have these problems. Yeah. I think it's something we all struggle with. You long for a better country and they feel helpless. What can be done? I wanted to write about that longing for country.
I wanted to speak about the characters. We can already tell who your favorite character is, but we'll get to her a little bit later. I loved Ego. Ego was one of my favorite characters for a lot of reasons. She's the character that experiences the most upheaval, has to do the most inner work, but also that shows a lot of courage in the face of difficult situations. I think a lot about difficult parental relationships. We think often of the father as a protector, provider, and a lot has been said about how mothers can be their daughters' first bullies, right? But not a lot is said about how fathers set the tone for the ways in which their children relate to men and relationships. I think about how men are often posted as their daughter's protectors, but Ego's father is her first abuser. He's the first example of the ways in which men can be violent and can be cruel, right? And I think about what this means for her ability to relate to men in the future. Because yes, a lot of the book is retrospective, but a lot of it is also forward-facing, and she experiences difficult relationships, and a lot of that is related to how her father set the tone initially. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the father-daughter relationship and what commentary you were making about what this means for how Ego will relate to men in the future and her romantic relationships.
Thank you. That is a good question. And I'm happy you observed that, because I don't think many people have asked me about it. A lot of women view men, because the first man you can read your father, right? You grow up viewing men through that lens. And there's some sort of trauma in that, because they build your initial expectations, your initial fears, like, because this is what a man is, this is what a grown man is. And then you grow up, and then for Ego, it's like she's active. It's different because now there's added trauma here, right? And she's actively seeking signs because she's trying not to live the life her mother lived. But it creates this situation where she's almost paranoid, because every little thing is, oh my God, this might be my father again. This might, because she's actively running away from him. I really wanted to write about that. Even Zina, it's milder because of how strong Ada is as her mother. But even in Zina's case, she goes for men that are soft, because her father is like this overbearing presence in her household, growing up, that she's eager to run away from that. So she goes for men she views as soft, even when they are not good for her. So we see it with Halil, we see it with Bayo. Bayo seems soft, but he's really bad. He cannot stand on anything. But it also affects how because she's also running away from that. She's trying to escape her mother's decisions. And I think it's something that society, we need to do better at, because even in cases where men are absent in the home, I think that also leaves a mark in how women view men. And sometimes we have some cases where women are looking for father figures because they don't have father figures at home, or they are longing for whatever it is that they think this person should have given them because the person has been absent. I think it creates all sorts of traumatic situations, whether present or absent, or just, and actually accepting that and facing it head on and dealing with that. I don't mean this in an offensive way, but I do believe that we all do bear some sort of trauma that we go with. The question is, how do we address and face that trauma head on? And so that was, and we see it with Eriife. I know Eriife is not as sympathetic a character for most people, and it's understandable. Her father was loving, but she felt he didn't stand up for her mother when he should have, right? He didn't stand up enough, or she blamed him for her mother's death. And then so she gravitates towards a man that she feels is that has a lot more presence, a person that gets things going. But then she now falls into a trap where she completely loses herself to this man, So it's really interesting, and it's something. And I know I'm talking about this a lot, but it's something that does play in my mind a lot. How these things influence our decisions. As you can tell, we got to exploit in my writing.
I think you've touched a little bit on the pervasive ways in which abuse stunts women's emotional life and development, right? Particularly, we think with Ego trapped in a particular moment, but I think also for her twin sisters, right? I think that they were accustomed to a particular type of life, and being accustomed to that particular type of life, when the mom decided to sever that relationship and be like, I gotta go, because if I don't go, I'ma die. For me, it made me think about women don't really leave abusive situation because the society doesn't support them leaving. Yes, she had a small cohort of 2 women helping her, but in truth, it was really difficult. She left, and the twins are like, when are we going home? Girl, are you not done with your stunts? The mother-in-law is like, girl, rip it up. We've heard you. You've made your point. Now move. And for me, it was constantly about this idea of like women, society doesn't listen to women, one. But more importantly, society doesn't support women leaving abusive relationships. It is this servitude. You are supposed to be at the beck and call of your man, even if he's beating you, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I think there is a difficult question about us being complicit in not supporting women who want to leave a relationship.
I think you've already touched on it. So if you look at my Twitter, my header says she's someone, and then it cancels mother, daughter, sister, because it's a big problem. Women are not seen as individuals. They're seen as, are you a sister, mother, daughter, and you have a role to play, a duty to perform for society to consider you worthy. It was something I talked about in Tomorrow I Become a Woman, because I think for me, that was like the outpouring of all my frustrations with this issue in society, where women are expected to women cannot just be. I think because women are seen this way, growing up, women cannot just be. Women are pressured from every angle, usually, to go back to abusive situations, especially when children are involved, because you're not supposed to live for yourself. You're supposed to live for other people. If you're not living for your husband, you're living your life for your children. With Uju's situation, even her own children are saying go back. But you have to consider something in this situation. Uju has made a mistake in trying to protect the twins. Only Ego knows the full reality of their situation.
Yeah.
So we don't see her having real conversations because she's trying to protect them. She feels like she's damaged Ego by her being privy to all these things. With the traumatic head injury, she's eager to shield just kids. But then the thing about it is, like, when kids aren't aware, then they just live very oblivious and sometimes very selfish lives. And we see it with this.
Selfish. I feel like they were selfish. The time when Ego finds the pair of shoes hidden behind. Y'all are like, I want to go back to daddy. And no, I don't blame.
Know if it's unfair to call it a selfishness. People talk about parental alienation, but narcissistic, problematic parents weaponize their children. There's a manipulation. Ego has seen it. Birth order is really important. Often when you're the oldest child, you know a lot of your parents' business in ways that your younger siblings don't. Because in the trenches, right? Well aware of them in their trenches. Younger children, like Aiwanose is saying, are often shielded. I think it's less of a selfishness and more of wanting to protect a problematic partner, even at your own peril. Women aren't encouraged to tell the truth of their situations because you're nervous about being labeled as being bitter and want to turn children against them. I don't know if they're selfish or just a product of the situation they find themselves in.
Now the twins, man, I don't like them very much, but I with you.
One of them is better.
One is better than the other. I agree.
All right, it's an unfortunate situation. It's messy, right? If we're not honest with our children about what really is happening, we're bound to find ourselves in these situations. So perhaps the truth and the commentary they're making is, no matter how difficult it is, let's be honest to our children.
I advocate for honesty. My parents being honest with me from the get-go opened my eyes to things other than my peers. It stopped me from making certain mistakes. I get parents wanting to shield their children, but when they really face the real world, it makes it a lot tougher for them, but at least preparing them in advance helps, because when they face reality, it's like, wow. And I've seen people spiral from that because they were just not ready for the real world. So because even when your parents try to prepare you, are not ready for adulthood. Adulthood comes and you're like, what is this?
I'm like, we wanted to be adults.
I was like, my mom at what age had how many of us? And I think, whoa, as I am now, I cannot deal with it. And I compliment my friends that have children. I'm always like, man, you guys are trying. I wonder, how did my mom do it? Adulthood is crazy. Paying school fees, all of that. I know you have
two. I have two. I have one and one on the way. So I will have two under two. I'm sure by the time. I know, I can hear the concern in Airione's voice. She's like, sister.
202 is a lot of responsibility. Well done.
Cool. Thank you. We'll figure it out. We'll make it work. But what I'm curious about in this book, particularly for Ego, Ego, my girl, goes through too much. But
no, honestly. Yo.
Ego. There's a navigation that Ego has to do. And I think that you were asking the reader some difficult questions, right? So I think about the violence and the weight of secrets and shame and how they can really weigh you down, right? So there is a navigation that Ego has to do between speaking her truth in the face of judgment and rape culture and this deeply misogynistic space that she finds herself in. But there's also a freedom in being able to speak your truth. And there's a dance that we see Ego navigating these two polar reality. Shame and secrecy cannot exist where you speak your truth. Those two things can't happen. And I wanted to speak about why you wrote the navigation in the way you did. There are difficult choices Ego has to make in the name of self-freedom and protection. That was striking to think about what sacrifices women have to make to tell their truths.
Mm-hmm. That was very difficult for me to write because someone tagged me on Twitter the other day and was ranting about it. I'm so sorry. That was hard for me to write because I did feel like a very strong personal connection with Ego, not because we have the same realities, but as a character, she was so moving and strong. I really connected with that when writing her. That's a very good question. Why did I write it the way I did? I really wanted to address the culture of silence, particularly in the church. We make women shield people in the name of the gospel. I've seen it happen, not just for this kind of situations, but just different talks. Comes forward and says, this thing happened to me. And then we're like, oh, no. We try to cover it quickly, put it under the blood. Don't speak against the man of God. No, and then it turns into this thing where you're abusing the person already abused, protecting the abuser, all under the name of God, which I find very, very distasteful because it's everything Jesus Christ stood against. But I also find it and just how much our system protects abusers. He said, why did I make her address it that way? Because I didn't want it to be something that just goes away. It never goes away. Recently, a couple of years back, Bisola Dakolo's wife came forward to accuse a well-known man of God of something similar. It had been 20 years, but she still carried that trauma because it doesn't go away. Standing up for yourself, the shame, the need to hide, it's almost self-protection because you know that coming out will mean further abuse. But I've always, like you said, Ego is such a strong character. She faces things head on. Even after the traumatic head injury, she's still willing to stand up to her father. I wanted to maintain that because I loved her character. I loved writing her character. I really wanted to maintain that. Like, she's the one that comes forward and says, I've been dealing with this thing. It's been so many years. I'm tired of dealing with this and I shouldn't have to bear the shame. That was very important for me to write.
For me, it was also interesting because I think this whole thing made me think about institutions of power, particularly big men with a capital B, right? And the gatekeepers of the truth. It felt like the people protecting him were the congregants. It made me realize it leads to the silencing of women because
all the time,
even after long, you need to contend with the fact that I need to face the shame of this thing having happened to me, the trauma of this thing happening to me. But I also need to contend with having to fight people who weren't even in the room. And people saying, oh, you are a bad person. Why are you saying this about a man of God? We see this impact in many ways. True love, true relationship. It's intricately linked. I wanted to speak about institutions of power and the silencing of women, right? But also the role that families play in helping perpetrators get away with heinous things.
I think you've already touched on some of it, but it's very common in our culture. You're raised to protect your family's reputation, right? Because you should think, growing up, whenever I did something, you say, and you bear your father's name. Didn't your mother raise you right? Because consistently you're told, think before you act, think of what people would think about your family. It's not just about you. That culture of shame and pressure to think about other people makes you want to hide, but it also protects these people. When we think about institutions into it, the institution of the church is raised to protect the reputation. We're raised to protect the reputation of the church. How will unbelievers look at us? The church is very powerful. The present body, as a Christian, even non-Christians, because the church has major influence on society, whether we like it or not.
The church plays a role in governance, right?
And the church is always trying to protect itself, right? It's a problem, a big problem, where we see powerful men of God associating with other men of God that have been accused of certain things because they're trying to stand together. What about your congregation? Are they not people as well? When we put the reputation of the church above the people are paying tithes, then what is the point of Christianity? What exactly are we doing here? For me, I find that quite abhorrent because it's a waste of time. It's against everything Jesus Christ stood for, especially if you read his words. I really wanted to write about that, how I feel people have accused me of having an agenda against the church.
If people want us to write or speak better about them, they should act better. If the church is not showing up and being better, then...
Exactly. And just how the church is able to use that power to silence people in different ways. I think it's a major problem, and I think it's something that needs to be called out until the church does better. If people within the church remain quiet and acquiesce to that pressure to continue, but if people call it out, maybe more churches will. And not just in abuse, and not just with abusive men of God. When you also look at abusive family situations, churches pressure women to go back to situations. They cancel you. Oh, God hates divorce, things like that, right? I remember last year there was a reckoning because a very popular gospel singer died, and we heard that she was abused in her marriage. And then everyone started having a conversation on how you want to tell me people were not counseling her. Her pastor was not aware that all these things were happening. What are we telling women in the church? It's true. I've seen it myself. If you're advising people to leave, you're the child of the devil that is trying to put asunder what God has joined together. You know?
Interestingly, we see how many of these men protect Ego's abuser because in many ways they can see themselves, right? So
yes,
what does it mean is if there is accountability for Pastor Kamsi, then there is going to be accountability for you and you and you. And so much of the protection is not only, I think there's a temptation to think these are bad people who want to protect a bad person, when in many ways they want to protect themselves so that there is a culture of not believing victims so survivors don't come forward, but also when survivors come forward, you've got your little band of bad men who are just like you, who are going to protect you because they have stakes in protecting each other. So it's not this innocuous protection from the Bible. A lot of that is also about self-protection. It's about recognizing that if they come for Pastor, they'll come for me. So I won't have the freedom to just abuse people in the way that I've been doing before. And I think it's tempting to believe a Pastor Kamsi is surrounded by yes men or henchmen. He's surrounded by men who benefit from a system that doesn't believe survivors.
Yes.
I was shocked by her relationship with Emeka. Hey,
shocked? Why were you shocked?
Let me tell you what I was shocked by before the Tlokonolo clutches their pearls. So much Ego's desire to move away from the past. She's trapped in a moment in the past, and she does many things to move away from the past. It reminds her of this traumatic event. She's seeking relief from the past, but she goes back to her old lover, right? And so there's this fascination with the past, but a desire to be freed from it. And I think that's very interesting to think about why her current freedom is so intricately linked to the past, right? Is this love? Is this everlasting love? Is this desire for unfinished business? I really wanted to explore that because I thought for somebody who wants to shed so much of the past, to return to somebody who so intimately represents the past is like an interesting decision.
Can I?
Hold on. Like lasting romantics. Of course, you're gonna find the romance in this life.
Look, I ain't married. I should just live in books. So it's interesting for me because I think you are right in one aspect, right? Seeking relief from the past. When she tries to date in the US and the UK, she's not able to connect with these people. And for me, it felt like unfinished business, right? It's either she needed to break up with him officially or get back with him. I was like, yes, queen. You need to finished. I felt like the way things ended was abrupt. I like beautiful beginnings, endings. When they got married, I was like, yes, because after everything Ego has been through, she deserves some semblance of happiness.
But her happiness, even in that space, is contentious. Even in that space, it's contentious, right? She still has to deal with Emeka's problematic family, right? Why could she just not have someone that didn't have all these things? She must deal with problematic parents and inability to face the truth about their rapey pastor, who's a pervert. She must navigate all of this violence. This love is constantly having to be fought for, to be bargained for, to be contended for. Do you know what I mean? It's like she has the opportunity to start fresh. I'm not saying she should have stayed with the people she met in the UK or wherever. I'm saying for somebody whose past holds as much trauma and as much pain as Ego does, the decision to go back to somebody who houses a lot of that, even inadvertently, I'm not saying it's Emeka's fault that she landed up in the situation that she, and this is not to blame Emeka, but it's to,
please.
It's to say that
is not an innocent bystander, but he did not participate in all of this.
He did participate, but he was there. He didn't participate. Emeka was problematic interactions. It felt like Ego was always bending over backwards for Emeka. She has to meet him at church. Emeka doesn't even know much about what's happening in her life, right? If you think about their earlier interactions, a lot of that is about Ego really coming to the fore, and Ego must demonstrate that she understands. And poor Emeka, even his name is common. The men in this book are interesting.
Oh my God! You're the first hater I've spoken to, and it's so interesting.
I'm not an Emeka hater. I'm fascinated by their relationship, because I think so much of being the model African daughter seeps into how we relate with men. It seeps into how we do this thing where we're constantly pleasing, extending yourself. You're the one who must constantly prove your goodness and worth. Even inadvertently, it sets the precedent in your relationships where the men that you're with feel that you must cater to them. Even if they don't think of it as catering, a lot of that is about you extending yourself for them. The relationship requires a little more analysis than to say, oh, it's so beautiful, there's love lost and now it's found.
I see both your views. When I was writing this, I loosely based Emeka on someone I know who grew up in a very religious household, and it made him almost, because his dad is a pastor similar to Emeka's dad. And I feel that for a long while, that made him resentful of the church because he'd seen behind the curtains. That's what I was going for. But that's the only aspect of the story I did on him. There's an aspect out of his control, right? He's living under their roof, can't pay his bills at that point. He has to do all these church things. She wants to see him because he's in all these church things. She has to go to these things because that's where he'll be. There's a proven self aspect to it. I do agree. I don't think it's a demand he makes. It's more of a demand that church makes. If she's not there, he doesn't care. But he's the one that wants to even come see her mom, that wants to come to their house, do things outside of the church. He has to do these things because they're just beyond his control. But then we see, at least, even though we don't see much of him in the second part, we see he doesn't force her into church things once they get back to that. He has the power because he's financially independent. He's successful in his own right. So he has the power to actually protect her in as much as he can from these outside forces, right? He does stand up for her when she comes out to say what happened to her. He supports her, even though he definitely knows that his parents will be against it. There's a part of their relationship that feels like she's the one doing all these things and giving all these things. But I do want to make clear that he doesn't demand it. As long as she exists, it's fine. And that's what I was going for when writing.
I was there with you.
I can see that portion that there is a point where he redeems somewhat, right? Yes, he's a product of his circumstance, but there is a redemption there. I have to concede the fact that he said he waited for her and longed for her.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tsakonolo will kill me if I say any more about Emeka. But you're right.
Please, Emeka alone.
I'm asking this question. Hold it up to a light. Hold it.
I want to talk about your favorite character. I think we all know who your fave is in the book. Not all your children.
Who do you think?
Zina, of course, it's Zina.
Yeah,
No
hundreds.
doubt, it's Zina, no doubt. But
Even in reading Zina, you can tell that it came from a place of ease. It feels like Zina came to sit with you and told you about herself.
Yes.
Zina makes us ask difficult questions and sit with difficult things, right? One of the things that I think about and that I relate to is this maternal abandonment, right? And the relationship that Zina has with her mother it's hard, right?
Right.
And hard in really terrible ways. And I was interested to know about what informed this relationship. Sometimes parents may be jealous because they didn't get where you are, or judgmental because of how the world perceives you. I was interested in this maternal abandonment and the kind of the depth where this abandonment and the friction stems from.
Awesome question. Like, yes, Zina is my favorite character. I I loved writing all three, but Ego goes through so much. Zina as well, but I think Zina is just there's a craziness to Zina. Because I'm not that crazy, and I admire people like that. So I base Zina's character on my good friend who's a little crazy. That's the only aspect, and she knows because like she could just call me around, like one random day. I'm like, oh, I've cut my hair and dyed it red, and I won't flinch because she's just. And but no, like you said, the very difficult. I think the thing with Zina, in that situation with Ada is very interesting in that Ada is very traditional. She conforms to societal expectation. And then she has this daughter who she cannot understand why she's the complete opposite of her. Right. And I think the major friction the major point of friction is that these are both very strong-willed, strong-headed characters, right? And neither will bend for the other. Zina so at that thing, since she pushes Zina, Zina will conform, right? But then, of course, Zina will never come. I think that stems. So I think that stems from many things. I wouldn't say Ada is jealous of Zina per se, because it's not like Ada ever wanted to explore, right? But I think she cannot understand why Zina is not content and she sees, and I think there's a bit of resentment in that she sees her husband in Zina, because a major issue she and her husband have throughout their marriage is the fact that she's everything. She's the perfect wife. She's stunning. She's everything, and he still cheats. It's like, am I not enough for you? And she sees that supposed greed in Zina. So is that resentment as you want more? Why isn't this enough for you? Why can't you just be like us? Why can't you just have a family, settle down, live the traditional life? Why do you want more? You're pretty, but I'm also pretty. That's where the resentment comes. And for Zina, she's seen her mother's life. She doesn't want it in any way, shape, or form because she's seen it up close. But then she wants her mother's love. It's a difficult situation to be in when you love someone, but you don't want their choices. You don't want their decision. And so all her life, she's trying to prove to her mom, I'm different, but why don't you love me like this? Why can't you see that? Even when she's successful, she never feels like a success until her mother tells her, I watched your movies and I love them. It's love in a strange way, because you cannot say Ada does not love Zina. Mm-hmm. She does, and she thinks everything she's doing is for her own benefits, right? Like I said, it's not straightforward. And of course, Zina loves Ada, because even when she hears her mom is sick, she completely collapsed.
Yeah. She's so dramatic. Why are you here now? I'm not dying.
That is a real life hater, like premium haterade. She was sipping on that haterade. But what I thought was beautiful was Zina's friendship with Ego. Zina sacrifices so much of herself to be the kind of friend that Ego deserves. I think that's beautiful, right? I feel that friendship transforms beyond boundaries and they become kin. Family, right? In ways that are unconventional, we don't think about family. I want to explore that friendship more, because the weight of the friendships of their mothers collapse under the trials and tribulations of life. So their mothers, it feels like their mothers get to a point, but their friendships are not able to transcend the point from friendship to kinship. And there's almost like a righting of the wrongs with their daughters, because their daughters are able to become kin in ways that they could not. I want to talk about that relationship and see Black women center and love each other in ways that are kin, chosen fan.
What you said is perfect. How Black women love each other. I love how we do friendship. It goes beyond the boundaries of friendship. We're truly willing to do anything for each other, and I like that. Since I've moved here, I find that how I do friends, like I'm just used to this certain kind of bond that it just doesn't feel the same here. And I think. And when writing about these three women, I wanted to write about the fact that they've grown up together. They're like sisters because their mothers were very close. But then they themselves now have to decide what they want their friendship to be. And they decide to maintain it despite the distance and despite everything. Now we have Eriife who pulls away after her mom dies, right? And she's sick. She becomes just consumed by this man. And she doesn't realize it until it's too late. But even then, she still considers this woman her friends. Friendship is weird. Humans are weird and complex. I really wanted to write about how the best friends you can have as a woman are other women. I'll always say it. And I say this as someone who has many male friends as well. The best friends you can ever have as a woman are women. When I think of the people I'll call, the people that have always been there for me, just other women, because nobody understands what you're going through like other women. I always encourage women to have your own tribe. It's just there for you because, like you said with Zina, because I think it's also that thing of sacrificing ourselves that we're raised to do, but we also do it for each other. Zina is willing to go to the ends of the earth for Ego, even though Ego makes the decision to come back without her. After Zina's advised her against her, she's still there for her. And that's friendship. There's nothing greater than that one.
I mean, I love that, right? What I found really interesting for me towards the end is the realization. I've not been thinking a lot about this, about like, perhaps some of us may not get companionship in the way that we would like to, but we can't not live our lives because we're waiting for someone to partner with us. Zina's decision to create a family without a man was about that, right? That in some ways you need to create the life that you've dreamed and imagined. And I wanted to speak about that, why it was important for you to bring that forth, because in conservative Black African families, the decision to become a single parent is frowned upon. The need for a husband, a family is important. She, in true Zina style, goes against the grain. I wanted to know your commentary around that.
Zina is very unconventional, and I needed to stick with that. I prioritize romantic relationships so much. I was telling my friend recently that I have a small pet peeve. I might be a bit hypocritical because I'm such a romantic. But when women meet a guy and then marry him within like maybe a year, and the next thing you're like, oh, this is my best friend. Like, fam, what happened to all your friends?
She's the reason. Eriife, she was one of friends. My husband, this, my husband.
Not too much on Eriife. Not too much now. Not too much on Eriife. Pump the brakes.
We prioritize romantic relationships so much that we forget that, to be quite honest, friends are really, like, yes, romantic relationship is very, I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not trying to step on it. But what I'm saying here is friends play such an important role in your life, especially as a woman. Female friends especially really help you, really uphold you, really support you. But then in Zina's situation, Zino, who is a man, the only thing missing from their relationship romance is being protective, provided in many ways. He supported her career, and he's a friend. I wanted to write that unconventional thing. Sometimes it's okay not to have the dream, right? It might not happen for everyone. We have to acknowledge that, right? Be honest. We just have to acknowledge that it might not happen for everyone. But then even if it doesn't happen for you, you can still create the life you want. You can still seek happiness in other ways. I really wanted to write that. It's possible to seek happiness in other ways. I wanted to encourage more women to not feel like, because Ego has this happy ending in Emeka, but as Zina can have a happy ending that doesn't necessarily have romance.
I'm Team Zino. If you want to write about that part of their story. I'm here for it.
Something that
I was ready. I don't want to lie.
Yeah,
And I was like, when is it happening? Why are these?
And I feel like there'll be a moment of realization for Zina. I think Zina has not met and interacted with someone like Zino in a romantic way, and she can't fathom that this could be. I feel like Zino is in love with her, but because he knows who Zina is, he's willing to settle for even a part of being in her life, even if it's not.
Why not? Take it out of my scrotum.
I wanted readers to create their own story for them. Do they remain friends? Do they fall in love?
They are in love. I'll talk about Eriife before we wrap up, but I found Eriife.
I'm an Eriife hater.
I'm not an Eriife lover because I don't understand, but what I do think is interesting is that the older you get, the more you see more Eriifes, right? And I think she's an example of the ways in which desire reveals the gap between what we think are our ideals and the ways in which we live our politics, right? Because Eriife is the most politically aware, the strongest opinions about right and wrong. She participates in a deep betrayal of self. The betrayal of self is a very deep betrayal that she participates in. And I am curious about why Eriife steps into that kind of self-betrayal. Because it's one thing to pretend women like Eriife don't have agency. Eriife is a willing participant in her own self-betrayal. That is interesting because you have your personal politics and the ways in which you live your politics. There is such a gulf between them.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk about Eriife because
Eriife is such a complex character, right? I love writing characters like that. Most people hate them, but some feel sympathy for them. Like you said, you have your politics and how you live your politics. As we've gotten older, we've come to see those people we saw growing up advocate for all these things. When they get into power, they become what they hate and what they criticize, all the things. And it's happening right now even in Nigeria, where people that fought against the military regime, that walked the street, that were very vocal, are now basically breaking every law breakable. Basically, they become what they've criticized. And I think that's what we have with Eriife. In the name of politics, she's making compromise after compromise because she's married to this man that she's enamored with, who's a lot older, who she's been with since she was underage. And he is able to take advantage of that power dynamic to influence her to do his will. She doesn't realize until it's too late. Even when she betrays her friends, she's able to convince herself she's doing the right thing because remember, she calls them like, see, this person has power, this and that. I think you should go. Because she's trying to say, I'm doing this for your own good. Like I'm trying to help you. And that's what she's been able to convince herself. Because when you're able to first convince yourself of the lie, I'm helping them, but then she regrets it. But then how can she fix it when she's still married to this man? It's a complex situation. Faye considers herself different from her mother. The way Chinelo sacrifices herself to the point of death, she's the same way. And she doesn't realize it until it's too late that she's sacrificed herself for this marriage. So when I was writing Eriife, I wanted to write about those women who were different when they were younger and didn't plan to become subsumed within their partner. She's a doctor, has a hospital, but barely goes there. We see it happen over, and we see as you get older, more women. And you won't see your friends being transforming into people like Eriife. And you're like, what happened to you? You weren't like this when you were younger. It's not on purpose, right? It's a slow, gradual process of losing yourself until you get to a point you're like, what's happened? Who am I? I wanted to write about that. I wanted people to have sympathy for people like that. I know it's hard. It's very hard because these women also are harmful and we see it, right? Yeah.
Eriife is complex, right? She makes bad decisions, but bad things also happen to her. You feel sorry for her because you're like, girl, you don't deserve this, right? Oh, no, you don't deserve any of this, right? But for me, I wanted to say before we wrap up that I think one of the most beautiful things about this novel is the grace of friendship. Despite Eriife's behavior, Ego and Zina really shelter her, right? We spoke earlier on about Black women showing up for each other. And I suppose the real question is, why make this choice? Does it say something about forgiveness as an act of love?
Yes. I think the ultimate act of love is forgiveness, being able to put everything aside and show up when it matters most. Women are capable of that. I don't know if it's especially Black women, African women. I don't know if it's. I think we just have the ability to say, do you know what? We see it over and over again, even where it's detrimental. If we're being honest, like situations where maybe a man abandoned his family for ages, blah blah. He's sick and he's dying, and then it's the ex-wife that's taking care of him, which is terrible. Which is terrible if we're being honest. But then in this situation, I wanted to show the power of love and forgiveness. Ada is not happy. They're all not happy with Eriife, but immediately they hear this daughter, they move into action immediately. It's not a question; it's immediate. That's love, and that's commitment. Everything else falls apart because this person needs me, and it's such a beautiful thing. And I think women do it so well. I've seen it in my own life. People are like, "Oh, no, we have girls that say we can only be friends with men." I always find that so funny. As someone who's worked in finance, I do have a lot of male friends. But I always say my female friends are my ride or dies. Recently, I met a group of women who have been friends for over 20 years. They met at their children's school. And now the children are adults, but they're still friends. It was beautiful to see. And I was like, this is what I was writing about. Just how they've helped each other, upheld each other over the years. I love it. I think women need to, in this world of patriarchy, we need to always be there for each other, regardless.
I think that's a beautiful note. Thank you so much, Aiwanose. This has been a beautiful conversation. Congratulations on writing such a beautiful book.
Thank you.
It's great that the sophomore curse did not strike you. Long may it last. Thank you so much for this reading. As you can tell, I enjoyed it. Congratulations once again. Excuse me?
I'm saying besides Emeka.
You can't just say Emeka is not all that. Come to my house. But I think the fact that we're so passionate about these characters is a testament to the amazing work that you've done, Aiwanose. I think that the fact that we're so invested in it. So thank you once again from the Cheeky Natives. We can't wait to see what's next, but we also can't wait to see what this book will do in sparking conversations, asking people to think about friendship, love, and grace. We could all use a little bit of grace.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've had a great time. Your questions were so deep. They helped me think about the book in a different way. Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. I think Alma's telling the truth about this testament of these characters stayed with us long after we read the book. And we just wanted to say thank you. And we really do hope that this book does amazingly well. But I'm sure we'll have you back for book number 5, number 3, number 4. The What's Day. And Cheeky Natives, don't forget, you can get yourself a copy of We Were Once Girls at The Cheeky Merchant. So just hit us up and say, hey, I want a copy, and we will definitely give you one. Until next time, Cheeky Natives, it's outie!
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Cheeky Natives. Don't forget to subscribe, review, and rate the podcast on all your streaming platforms.